Good morning, everybody. My name's Andrew McColl. I'm the Queensland Director of FamilyVoice. And our topic today is COVID restrictions, justifiable or authoritarian abuse. I'm joined today by Professor Augusto Zimmermann. And Professor Zimmermann was professor at Sheridan College in Perth in Western Australia. He is also adjunct professor of law at the University of Notre Dame at the Sydney campus. He's a former Law Reform Commissioner with the Law Reform Commission of Western Australia and a fellow Vice President of the Australian Society of Legal Philosophy, a fellow at the International Academy for the Study of the Jurisprudence of the Family, and editor-in-chief of the Western Australian Jurist Law Journal. Now living in Sydney, he's employed by Alpha Crucis University College as their Foundation Dean and Professor of Law. Professor Zimmermann, welcome to our Family Voice Zoom session today.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's a pleasure to talk with you.
We know that the COVID era a few years ago, Augusto, creates or has created a fair bit of controversy amongst the Australian community. There was a great deal of inconvenience and I would dare say suffering amongst the community with various steps that took place. Would you say, Augusto, under the guise of a COVID medical emergency, was there at the state or federal level an abuse of political power?
So the use of emergency powers in Australia definitely resulted in the abuse of power because the measures were often unconstitutional. They clearly undermined the idea of legality known as the rule of law, and they have the potential to become more permanent in time. The authorities continue to enact these sort of laws that can eventually be used in the future. The problem is that during COVID, many of our fellow citizens behaved as I have described in some of my books, including this one on emergency powers and COVID restrictions. They behaved more like good Germans. That's the term that I used, which is basically an old totalitarian strategy of creating fear or striking fear in the hearts of the population so that they become more docile citizens. But not only that, they become instigators of actions by the government for the sake of feeling protected. So the idea of public safety trumps the idea of protection by government of fundamental rights and freedoms.
Right. Now, I thought that the Constitution, Augusto, precluded all forms of medical conscription, but was I wrong?
You were right. The High Court was wrong, and the politicians were acting in collusion with judges to make sure that one of the most relevant provisions in our Constitution was entirely disregarded. But bear in mind that emergency powers tend to be used for the justification of concentration of powers and arbitrary measures. We saw this taking place, for instance, in 1930s in a certain country, and I can be more specific, in Germany in the 1930s, when the Weimar Constitution was ignored by the government of the day in the 1930s to protect the German people, and as a result, make sure that the relevant protections of fundamental rights and freedoms would be ignored on the grounds of safety, public safety, which is a similar term used by the French revolutionaries when they started the era of terror just after Robespierre emerged to power.
Yes, so the matter of interstate commerce is also mentioned in the Constitution as being a matter of liberty, but this was set aside by the state premiers during COVID as if it were irrelevant. Was this justified?
Now, that was entirely unjustified. But before I go to these, I have to remind you that there is a very clear provision in section 5123A saying that nobody should be subject to pharmaceutical or medical treatment because that constitutes a form of civil conscription. This sort of approach was accepted by the High Court in the past, and there is one important decision called the British Medical Association, whereby the judges said that not only government is forbidden to interfere in the normal relations between medical doctor and patient, but what cannot be done by the government should also not be done by private companies. And what we saw during COVID was a complete disregard of this particular provision. As for the border closures, that is in a clear contradiction to Section 92 of the Constitution, which says that there is a free movement not only of products, but the intercourse also of or movement of individuals, so that we should be, according to this provision, absolutely free to cross the existing borders. That was probably the most important section, and is the most important section of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia, because the main reason as to why we developed a federation was to put an end on border closures and to allow citizens of this country to be able to freely move around and to freely cross the existing borders. So that was a disgraceful violation of the Constitution. And it is so blatantly unconstitutional, even because the provision talks about this being an absolute guarantee of the citizen. The term used is absolutely free. The border should be so absolutely free. And it was not what happened during COVID when the High Court decided that the word absolute now has become a relative word.
Right. And so there were, of course, many people who were caught outside of Australia during or before COVID, and then there were people who were trying to get overseas but weren't able to do so. So under the guise of supposedly protecting the community from disease, was this provision to prevent people moving into or out of Australia also an abuse of power?
Absolutely. This was an extraordinary measure. It started with the prohibition of Australian citizens visiting a particular country, namely India, into 2021. The then Prime Minister Scott Morrison disgracefully closed the borders, alleging that there was a possible transmission of the virus via those who were visiting on a tourist basis, or perhaps their relatives in India. But then the measure was extended to every single Australian citizen, which is a gross violation of human rights and totally condemned by the international community, especially in light of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which says that citizens have the right to return to their countries. What happened was absolutely disgraceful. And one particular person, a professor of psychology, at the University of Sydney, who went to visit his family due to the passing away of his father, after attending the funeral, was prevented from returning to Australia and had to help Australians who got caught in Budapest and could no longer return to the country. And because some of them were running out of money, the professor had to receive them in his own house. Otherwise, they would have become homeless in an alien country. And another thing is the case of this elderly couple at the age of 80, in their 80s, who had to be living in London for almost 1 year because they were precluded or preventing from returning to their own nation. It is an abominable, very abominable thing, and it ends up causing us a tremendous harm, and the harm also, I would say, of our international reputation as a country that should value the protection of fundamental human rights.
Right. So looking back on those couple of years, Augusto, do you think that the COVID era set some dangerous precedents, and what are we left with today?
Well, look, in many ways, we have become a nation of good slaves who love their masters. And that was a prediction in Aldous Huxley when he wrote that important book called The Admirable New World. And it says in the book that there would be a time in which people would be happy to be serving their masters, because that would lead them to feel they were protected. And that's exactly what's happening in Australia with the worship of government. Perhaps this is a consequence of the rise of the welfare state in the 1960s, an unintended consequence where the people of this country expect too much of government. And the government, I think it was probably Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin who said that a government that in which we expect too much of this government, it will be powerful enough to offer you the protection that you're expecting to receive, but it is also powerful enough to destroy you, destroy your life, and undermine your fundamental rights and freedoms. So Australians are gambling with this, and I believe that we always have the problem that power tends to corrupt. And Lord Acton in the 19th century said very clearly that absolute power then tends to corrupt. Absolutely. There is a need to perhaps reconsider this situation and make sure that we have our rights and freedoms restored. But also, I would say that we have perhaps a reconsideration of the mechanisms of checks and balances, which are perhaps not working properly. We need to establish more separation of powers. We have to make sure that there is more governmental accountability so that all these things are never going to be repeated again.
Do you think that there's the political will amongst the Conservatives in the nation to deal with this issue, Augusto?
I think there is no such a will. You see that during the election, there was no promise to reduce the size of the state, and quite the contrary. Some conservatives support big government, and it's a very terrible thing that they do so, because it tells me that there is something about an idolatry of government and an overconfidence in what human beings can provide. This is absolutely unbiblical, and we should never, ever trust in men too much, because we are not here, in my opinion, to worship the state and consider the state our ultimate provider. When we actually do so, we are practicing a form of idolatry. Right. And a government, as I say, that is worshipped, it's actually going to become an idol, and idols always disappoint us.
Yeah, so I should just mention to our viewers today that if they'd like to put a question to Augusto this morning, they may do that by just clicking on their Q&A button at the bottom of their screen on your computer. If you'd like to send those in while I'm talking to Augusto, and my colleague in Family Voice, Peter Downey, will be collating those questions, and we'll be able to put those back to Augusto in the latter part of our session this morning. But just changing tack to another matter, Augusto, the matter of the anti-discrimination laws, especially as they apply to Christian schools in Australia, you would probably know that this has been a vexed political issue now for a number of years. Now, the Labor Party has the numbers to force legislation through the Parliament, but for Christian schools, which have been growing strongly for years, this would be a game changer. Where do you think this is likely to lead?
Well, it is going to lead, in my opinion, to the undermining of freedom of association, which is a very important element for the existence of a free and healthy society. Right. Definitely, democracy requires the existence of a pluralistic society. So the idea of undermining this concept of religious freedom of association undermines also the very foundation of our democratic system. Definitely, people have the right to associate and form groups. Nobody's forcing the Labour Party to have as one of his or her candidates a person who is opposing the ideas of the Labour Party. By the same token, people who establish not political but religious associations should have the same right to employ people according to their values. This is, in my opinion, another form of undermining diversity, undermining a pluralistic society, and eventually, as a result, undermining democracy itself.
We have noticed in the news in the last few months that people like Tommy Robertson in Britain, he was jailed in a high security prison in Britain for producing a factual documentary. And one comedian was recently arrested when he got off a plane at Heathrow over tweets he made in the US. He later claimed that the UK police force is captured by ideology. Surely these developments are hostile for freedom, and they require us to stand up.
Absolutely. And the situation in the UK is absolutely dramatic and serves us as a notice, puts us on a notice that this is not something that happens on day one and that's all done in one single day. It's part of a gradual process. And in England or UK, you actually have no right to express opinions in public, but not only that, people who are using their social media are being visited by the police and being even incarcerated. So this is a very terrible development, and you need to be very clear that this is a totalitarian undertaking. The right to free speech in England has been now entirely undermined. And not only that, but it appears to be the case that apart from one single group of people, all others are being entirely silenced. There is a form of Sharia by stealth taking place at this very moment in England. And this is obviously because the political elites has taken the side of this particular religion. Even the king, the woke king, is very happy to support and allow people to express opinions in favor of this religion. But nobody has the right to criticize this particular religion, or they cannot criticize anything that the elites are opposed to this form of criticism. So obviously, this is a confirmation that the right to free speech is completely undermined, because the difference between a free citizen and a slave is that the citizen has the right to express their opinions, because this is an essential thing in a democracy, the free debate and the free exchange of ideas.
Now, we do know, Augusto, that the Ninth Commandment prohibits us from slandering. And I would have thought that the common law would have protected free speech, but our e-safety commissioner doesn't seem to agree with me, because people could be offended by that or be offended by free speech. Now it seems she's been influenced by people that don't approve of Elon Musk's libertarian views. She's challenged Billboard Chris, and he won the court case from that confrontation. So my question is, who is she subject to, and should her office be dissolved?
Her office should be dissolved, but we have to bear in mind that together with the idea of common law rights, which are based on precedent and ultimately on biblical principles, because the greatest jurists of the common law created these principles, inspired by the Holy Scripture. The likes, I refer here to the likes of Bracton, Cook, Blackstone, and others. Unfortunately, these rights have been undermined for a long time, and they have been aggravated, the undermining of these rights, after the UK Parliament was considered to be by the parliamentarians themselves as a sovereign power. So together with the concepts that we have inherited from England, such as the rule of law and free speech, there is another concept that has turned out to be tragic, which is the idea of parliamentary sovereignty, and which means basically that legislation can violate any right whatsoever without further consequences. And this is actually stated in law books. It's even accepted by the courts of the UK, of England, and accepted also by the parliamentary elite, which is quite happy with the idea that they can turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man. Of course, that was the joke made in the 19th century, that the parliament can do whatever it wants. The only thing the parliament cannot do is to turn a man into a woman, but I think they have fixed this impediment now.
So with these assaults on the individual freedoms that we've faced in Australia at both the state and federal level, have we lost our constitutional protections, or have they simply been quietly subverted?
They have been utterly destroyed. I actually feel that my area of law is no longer so relevant, because you know that during a moment of crisis, during an emergency, the government might very well disregard the relevant provisions once again, with the connivance or support of the unelected judicial elite. And that's actually a consequence of what I have been trying to explain before, of concentration of powers. When I got appointed to be a law reform commissioner in Western Australia, I was appointed after receiving a phone call from the then Attorney General. Unfortunately, that's the way judges are also appointed. I would not expect the judicial elite to do anything different, apart from, I would say, working together with the political class in advancing the best interests of these two groups. The members of the judiciary are appointed by the government of the day, and those who control the lower house are controlling the executive. And in combination of these, we have to bear in mind that they can do what's called delegated legislation, which means that the executive has the power to legislate in Australia, even using Henry VIII clauses. Henry VIII was an autocratic ruler, a king that was considered or regarded to be very authoritarian. And what we have in Australia is basically the constitutionalization of legislative power by the executive. The executive can legislate and even abrogate fundamental rights and even repeal legislation via executive fiat, which is utterly contrary to the idea of the parliamentary system and the idea of checks and balances.
That sounds a bit serious, Augusto. So just looking at that description that you've given us, which is pretty confronting, how can we get these situations back? How can we see our legislative process improved so that our social protections that we used to expect from government could be restored to us?
Well, I think if it was a 19th century Irish politician who said repeat that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance.
Right.
And definitely we need to have better politicians. But for this to occur, we need to have a better society as well, because the politicians are a result, the quality of the politicians, a result of a lack of vigilance and a lack even of moral values. So we need definitely to re-educate our society so that they can understand that there is a need for them to be more respectful of their sense of dignity, and to elect politicians who are wanting to uphold the rule of law, wanting to respect our common law rights and traditions. But since power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, I would love to see in the future a sort of American model whereby the ministers are not necessarily members of parliament, but impeachable and accountable to parliament. George Washington, by the way, didn't want to be called a king, but the American model is actually a monarchical one. It's actually more of a monarchy than England itself, because there is a proper separation of the legislative and executive. I do not appreciate the fact that half a dozen oligarchs can actually control all the branches of government, because those who control the lower house have the power over the executive, and those who have the power of the executive have the power to appoint judges. So this country is controlled by half a dozen people, and that's never a good thing, as I have mentioned, because power corrupts and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. So I'm in favor of a constitutional reform in this sense.
Constitutional reform, yes, absolutely. And really, this is an opportunity, isn't it, for Christians to step up to the plate and begin to remind the community of these things, of the importance of the Constitution and of common law, and the importance of our local representatives in our various parliaments respecting the common law and the rule of law.
Exactly. The rule of law is not just about having laws, because the Marxist approach, which seems to be the one the political class is very aware of, it's about law being an instrument of tyranny and oppression.
Right.
Having law is not enough. It is not enough for the realization of the rule of law. The rule of law is about laws that guarantee the protection of God-given rights, rights
Yes.
to life, liberty, and property. And if you do not have the law being an instrument for the advancement of the common good, there is no point in having oppressive laws. I would actually prefer to live in a state of nature than to be under the oppression of a Leviathan, a big government that can do whatever it wishes by using legislation as an instrument of tyranny and oppression.
Well, thank you, Augusto. Now I'm going to turn over to my friend and colleague, Peter Downey. Peter, do you have any questions coming in from our viewers today for Augusto?
Yes, I do have a few, Andrew. So the first one, Augusto, is where in the Bible can we look to see that limited government is recommended?
Well, there are many admonitions about what kings did that were absolutely trespassing their authority. And that's why we have in the Calvinist tradition the idea of a sphere of sovereignty. There are certain things that government can never do, for instance, to take the life of an innocent person. And the Bible has many, many passages about civil disobedience, a lawful right to disobey. For instance, when the midwives were told by the Pharaoh to kill the Hebrew babies, they didn't go on obeying what the Pharaoh told them to do. They did the very opposite. Not only that, they lied to the Pharaoh. And definitely lying can be a godly thing if it is to protect the life of an innocent person. Another example could be given of Nazi Germany, when a German could be protecting a Jew or hiding a Jew. It would not go to the government and say, yes, if you ask, I'm asked whether I have Jews being shielded and protected, I would just reveal their whereabouts and denounce them. So there are many examples, but this is not a biblical one, but the example of Peter in the Sanhedrin, where the Apostle Peter, this is found in the book of Acts, that he was questioned by the Sanhedrin, basically admonish is the best word, to not preach the gospels, to not reveal the good news. And he told the members of the Sanhedrin that they could not do such a thing because he would never disobey God in order to obey man. So there is a limit to what governments can do. And not only that, God will bless the person who disobeys such an arbitrary command, because that is not a command based on the idea that the laws are to be instruments of or in accordance, better saying, with the teachings of Christ and with the law of God.
Thank you, Augusto. Another question is, how can conservative Christians better assert the truth and importance of biblical truth as a real objective framework for all people?
I think they have to be bold and courageous. We live in a very difficult time, but all it takes for evil to prevail is for those who are good to remain silent. And that is something criminal law called the crime of omission. It's not just commission, but also the crime of omission. If you see that in this country, hundreds of thousands, perhaps 100,000 or more babies are killed every year as a result of abortion, and you continue to vote for politicians and political parties that support the killing of the innocent, this person is going to be held accountable before God. The Lord says in Matthew, in the book of Matthew, the gospel according to Matthew, that some people will come to him and say, Lord, I went to church. I performed miracles in your name. Now, they're not performing their miracles because they are good people, but it's because in the name of the Lord, they can do all things, because all things are possible if you do it under the authority of God. But if you are actually the sort of person who is not doing what you're supposed to do as a believer, a follower of Christ, you are a hypocrite. And the Pharisees were really despised by God, and they were very religious people. So I must say that claiming to be a Christian is not a ticket to salvation. You have to actually bear fruits, because a tree that doesn't bear fruit, that is the parable of the fig tree. It will be cut off, and the lukewarm in the book of Revelation will be vomited. So I don't want to be in this position. I want to, when I die, to receive the welcoming of the Lord, and for him to tell me, well done, good and faithful servant. We have to actually invest in the afterlife, which will be an eternal one, and not about the material possessions that we can accumulate on this earth, because you're not going to take them with us when you die.
Thank you again, Augusto. Another question, is this a trial test run for bringing in the so-called New World Order? What do you think of that idea?
I think the elites are clearly trying to undermine the sense of nationality. Definitely in Europe, what's going on is basically an invasion and a population replacement, and also confusing the minds and hearts of people. There are many generations now being indoctrinated rather than educated. And if you do not know your values and traditions, you are more easily. So the whole idea of these groups is to demonize the nation, to confuse the kids who don't even know about their gender anymore. And that's actually very clearly a strategy of world domination. They want to make us all equal, and therefore undermining the idea of different cultures, different ethnicities. So that is the revisitation of what God condemned, which is basically the recreation of the Babel Tower. The Babel Tower is being recreated. English is going to become the universal language, and there will be no more difference between peoples and nations. And that's utterly, utterly condemned by God. And you know this quite well, as much as me.
Yeah, thank you, Augusto. The next question is reasonably long, so I'll try and paraphrase it a little bit. First part says, could Augusto hold up the book again and tell us the title and author? So I'll let you do that first, Augusto.
That's the book.
Emergency Powers, COVID-19 Restrictions and Mandatory Vaccinations, A Rule of Law Perspective by Augusto Zimmermann and Gabriel Moens.
Gabriel Moens is one of the leading constitutional law professors in this country. He's an emeritus professor of law at the University of Queensland. And prior to this publication, I published this called Fundamental Rights in the Age of COVID, edited by me together with Joshua Forrester, and that's volume 11 of the Western Australian Jurist. It's a collection of articles written by leading academics in the field, leading law professors, every single one of them denouncing the government due to the undermining of fundamental rights and freedoms during that terrible period of our history.
And where can people get these books, Augusto?
These two books are published by Cornell Court, and they are easily available online. You just need to visit the website of Cornell Court, or even going via Amazon, and you'll be able to order a copy of each of these two books.
Thank you, Augusto. And another part of the question is, are we able to access a transcript of the recording of the conversation presentation? And if so, how can that occur? We'll have a recording of the presentation up within about a week. And I believe on YouTube, you can ask for a transcript of that recording. So I think that's about all the questions that I had, Augusto, and I'll hand it back to Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I just wanted to perhaps ask you to conclude, Augusto. These last, 4 or 5 years of Australian life, we've noticed these sharp and sudden intrusions into our personal life, family life, state life at both state and federal levels. And what would be your parting advice for us in terms of considering the future of true constitutionalism in this nation and how we should act going forward?
I think, as I mentioned before, we need to be organized, we need to be mobilized. It's not time to think that it's all lost, because there is in some Christian circles this sense of fatalism, and to believe that the worse it gets, the more are the signs of the second coming of Christ. Jesus told us that only the Father knows when this is going to happen. And we have the moral obligation, the moral duty to do something when we see that things are not done properly. And there
Yes.
are lots of things not being done properly. So we have the moral obligation to continue to speak out and to be engaged in the political process. I say so, I speak so, not just as a legal academic, because the matter is more political than legal. Actually, the realization of the rule of law is as much political, cultural, and social achievement as it is a matter of having good laws. What we need above all is a good society. And this society will only be good when people give their lives or turn back from the state and give their lives to Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. What we need in this country is the revival of the church. And more than that, what we need above all in this country is to find Jesus and to have Jesus being received in the lives of people. And that's the only way we can save Australia. It's through the work of God. Only God can save us.
Well, thank you so much, Augusto, for sharing with us today. I've appreciated what you've said. I'm sure our viewers would as well. And we give you thanks. We give thanks to God for you and your labors today. And we wish you God's blessing for your future.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I pray for you and for your ministry. May the Lord continue to bless you, keep you, and give you inspiration to continue your important ministry.
Thank you so much. Well, God bless you. And we hope to talk once again soon.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
Bye-bye.